Hola, Bible 12. How's it going? Welcome to class. Let's do this. All right, so the lesson plan for today. Hopefully you've gotten started on that warm-up. If not, I'll re-explain for you in this screencast. So go ahead and make sure you get that warm-up done and watch this. And there's a couple of assignments this week. Or not this week. Whoa, it's late. The chapter 12 summary notes. One thing I want to draw your attention to is that when you do this summary, it's not just to start and highlight, but there's also a question that I want you to answer, which will make sense after we talk a little bit today. And then there's an exit ticket about sexuality and sacred marriage. And then homework is finish up your projects. This week, I'll be going through each of your blogs and working on giving you some feedback via email. So keep an eye for an email from me because that's how I will deliver you, hey, you should adjust this or change that regarding how you've done your blog. Also, because of the weirdness and the transition and all of that, the final due date, I'm going to bump it back to the following Monday, which is going to be May 4th, which will also buy me a little bit more time to give you some feedback. So be sure that you're staying on top of your marriage projects. If you're like, wait, what am I supposed to do? You needed to watch a lot of other screencasts that explained a lot of this stuff. So there's that. All right, let's do this thing. So Bible 12. So your warm-up was to explain sex to an alien named Fleegax 732P because he came to Earth and he believes that there's a God, because to this alien it's totally he was totally thinking that was the answer, and then we explained it to him and he was like, yes, there's a God. But then like he hung around the lunch tables and heard some people making jokes and talking about this sex thing, and is totally confused and like, hey, what's this sex thing all about, and how does God fit into that picture? So hopefully you've answered those three questions for the alien, assuming he has zero knowledge, because this alien is not built like us, does not look like us, does not have the same parts as us. So explaining to this alien, to the best of your ability, what is sex? Why did God make it? And if you're going to be like, and here's the most important thing you need to know about it, say that as well. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Hopefully you guys had a lively discussion. It'd probably be fun to see what other people posted on this one. Now, well, the reason I wanted to start this way is because oftentimes the way that we start our conversations about sex is with the no-nos, with the, hey, here's the things that you're not supposed to do. Sex, it'll give you STDs, it's a sin, it's bad, it's dangerous, stay away from it, or you'll die. That's basically what you hear growing up, right, in the church. And I wanted you to imagine, like, taking yourself out of that context. That's why I had you do this silly assignment with the alien, is because it pulls you out of that context to see the bigger picture of like, okay, what is this thing all about actually? Like, it not only to pull you out of like, maybe if you grew up in a church and there's like a really thick like shame culture there, or on the flip side, if it's just in teen culture where it's like flippant and like just something to joke about and like everybody does it or whatever, like to pull yourself back and think, okay, why did God make this thing and what is it all about, right? That's the place we want to go with this conversation. And then figure out, okay, how does this fit into this picture of what is a sacred marriage? A sacred marriage is something that isn't necessarily to make us happy, but to make us holy. So how does human sexuality fit into the picture of holiness? Usually when we have this conversation in class, like there's at least a handful of people who are totally incredulous, like, no, they can't have anything to do with each other. But I think it has to do with either you've been distorted one way to think that it's this shameful, bad thing, or you've been distorted another way to be like, it's this casual, like, meaningless thing that is just for fun. In either way, we miss the fact that the creator of the universe made it on purpose for some really specific reasons. So for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to have some assumptions that yes, it was God that invented sexuality and made it the way it is on purpose. I think hopefully this isn't a surprise to you. It produces offspring. That's how babies are made. Also, the prevailing assumption, provided that there's no like trauma in a person's past. The way that God designed this thing is that it's an enjoyable experience, and that it increases intimacy between a couple. Depending on what you learned in Bible 9, ninth grade Bible, part of the materials, like when there's like the little sexual education stuff in ninth grade Bible, we talk about the different chemicals that exist in, like, that are part of the sexual experience. And it's like oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin. And so oxytocin is actually like, it's the bonding chemical. It's the same chemical that's released when mothers are nursing their babies, and that creates that maternal bond with the child, and the child feeling that bond with the mother. It also, like, if you pet your dog for more than 20 seconds, there's an increase of oxytocin in both yours and your dog's system. So it's like a bonding experience. And it turns out that sex produces lots of oxytocin for people connecting with each other, in addition to the dopamine that's released. Also, if it's done wrong, like, this is where we like get into like some of the stuff that Christians say. A lot of times we skip over all of these first four things and we go straight to, yeah, if it's not exclusive, like if people are sleeping around with each other, then that intimacy and that connection that happens between two people is destroyed. Like, there's something about that exclusive closeness that gets ruined when it's shared with a bunch of people, right? I'm sure that none of you guys like wants your spouse to be sleeping around with a bunch of other people someday. And then last, has the potential for emotional and physical harm if practiced wrongly in or out of marriage. So hopefully in your conversation with Fleegax 730 whatever, you mentioned some of these things, right? And I think this last one is also important, because I think that in Christianity sometimes there's this assumption that, like, cool, as soon as you get married, then everything sorts itself out. However, there is still like holiness and goodness and like good and bad ways to practice sexuality that can be harmful to your partner, even if it's not a sin, right? There's still ways for sex to be a sin in marriage, provided that like you're not going along with what God intended for our human relations with each other. So that being said, I wanted to read a C.S. Lewis quote, because nothing like a stuffy 1950s British guy to make a conversation about sex even better. So here's what C.S. Lewis says about it. And I think it's really funny because he didn't know where our society would be going. But here's what he said. If anyone says that sex... Oh, we should do British, sorry. If anyone says that sex in itself is bad, Christianity contradicts him at once. But of course, when people say sex is nothing to be ashamed of, they may mean the state into which sexual instinct has now got is nothing to be ashamed of. If they mean that, I think they are wrong. I think it's everything to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be ashamed of in enjoying your food. There would be everything to be ashamed of if half the world made food the main interest of their lives and spent their time looking at pictures of food and dribbling and smacking their lips. So C.S. Lewis, he's making this commentary that there's nothing wrong with sexuality. Christianity, says, no, sex is a good thing. However, oftentimes when people say, hey, there's nothing wrong with sexuality, what they mean is the way that modern society views sexuality. And he relates it to food and says, like, imagine if we went around all day long just talking about and imagining and thinking about food. Because that's basically, like, in the modern human psyche, this is what sex is. Like, people, we joke about it, we talk about it, we make TV shows about it, we read books about it, we, I don't know, like, we say things like, that's what she said, because it's, like, constantly on our mind, right? And so he says, like, hey, yeah, that is something to be ashamed of, because, like, it's not supposed to be the main interest of our lives. The reason I think it's funny is because he's like, man, could you imagine if people just watched other people, like, eat? But then the Food Network exists, and so now we do that. So maybe we have an unhealthy relationship with food as well. And by maybe, I mean we definitely have an unhealthy relationship with food, especially in quarantine. Can I get an amen? All right. Just to kind of give us a more robust understanding of this topic, I want you to read Gigi's summary. And there are 3 things you're going to do. 1, you're going to star the thesis. 2, you're going to highlight 3 main points that stand out to you. And 3, at the bottom, did I say 1, 2, and 3? Anyway, at the bottom of it, I want you to answer this question. In your experience, have Christians... Oh, it should be given. Wow, grammar. In your experience, have Christians given a more positive view of sexuality or a more shameful / negative view of sexuality? I kind of want you to, like, after reading the text, you'll understand what that question is all about. So I just want to kind of like poll you guys. Have you received a more positive view or a more negative / shameful view? And this is, so pause and do this thing now. Ready, pause, go. And then last, for physiological desires and needs. With sexuality, like we went through that list of everything that God made sex to be and what things that are true about it. It is a basic, like, it is a normative human desire. For the furthering of the human species, it is a need. And so I think that sometimes people say that, and then, like, because of that, it justifies, so we should be able to do it however we want, wherever we want. But it's important to know this, that there's a time and a place for basic human desires and needs. A time and a place. For example, when I need to use the bathroom, I don't just go to the bathroom wherever I want to, right? When you're sitting, when you're sitting in class and you need to go pee, you don't just start going pee there in class, right? Because you realize that it is neither the time nor the place to go pee. And so you exercise self-restraint so that you can then go to the bathroom when it is the proper time and place. And so with, like, sexuality, as we talked about back in the, week 3 or week 4 of this class when we were talking about Eros love, the proper time and place is in that space where it exists, where there is intimacy, meaning people, like, know each other deeply, where there is that passion for each other, but then there's also the commitment, the lifelong exclusive commitment to one another. When those 3 things exist, meaning, like, that commitment one meaning marriage, when those 3 things exist, then it is the proper time and place. And so even if it is a basic human desire or need, there's a proper time and place for sexuality. And this is where I wanted to end our conversation, and then I'll let you go do your exit ticket. One more C.S. Lewis quote. This time I won't do a British accent because I want to make sure you get the point and not get lost in British accents. I think when I have earbuds in, I feel like my accents are worse. So the Christian says, creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exists. A baby feels hunger? Well, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim? Well, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire? Well, there's such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire for which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it to suggest the real thing. If that is so, I must take care, on the one hand, never to despise or be unthankful for these earthly blessings, and on the other, never to mistake them for the something else of which they are only a kind of copy, or echo, or mirage. I must keep alive in myself the desire for my true country, which I shall not find till after death. I must never let it get snowed under or turned aside. I must make it the main object of life to press on to that country and to help others do the same. And what Lewis is talking about here, I wanted to point to this reality, is that I think that, especially here in the middle, if none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove the universe is a fraud. Probably the earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it. And I think that this is where we need to get into, like, this discussion of, I believe it's Pascal that said, each of us has a God-shaped hole inside of us, that there's this, like, void that we experience, that there's a lack, this feeling of something missing, like that thing when you're laying in bed at night staring at your ceiling fan, and you catch yourself wondering, like, man, what is this all about, right? There's no amount of cake that you can eat. There's no amount of sex that you can have. There's no amount of video games that you could play. No amount of money that you can get. No amount of, I don't know, Corvettes and Maseratis that you can pile up that would fill that void that's in your soul when you're alone, like thinking, right? And so Lewis is saying that that lack points to the fact that there is something in another world that can satisfy us, and that something else is God, right? And what happens is, I think sometimes when we try to find that satisfaction without God, what we end up doing is we take the physical earthly pleasures and we try to fill that void. Like, this isn't true for everybody, but I think I find that sometimes, like, even our relationship with food, like, food is not about, like, I'm hungry so I need to eat it. Food sometimes is like, I'm unhappy so I need to get happiness in there, right? And I think that sometimes people pursue sexual or romantic relationships in the same way. Like, I'm unhappy, I feel a lack, I feel a void, and so they, like, seek romance, they seek attention, they seek affirmation, they seek sexual experiences with people, thinking that maybe that will fill, like, this void inside of me. And then unfortunately, on the other side of it, you find that people who are, like, largely sexually active are no more fulfilled than the rest of us, right? So I think that this is probably the best metaphor for, like, understanding this to me, is that bacon wrapped little smokies are delicious. I don't care who you are, even if you're a vegetarian. Bacon wrapped little smokies are delicious. But the purpose of bacon wrapped little smokies is that they're an appetizer. And what appetizers are supposed to do is that they're supposed to get you ready to eat the main course, right? When you go to, like, a wedding and they have, like, those little cocktail, like, shrimp and, like, little tiny things that you can eat beforehand, the purpose of an appetizer is it's to build your appetite. And I think the pleasures and the good things that God gives us in this world are appetizers, right? They're supposed to make us be like, man, this is really good. I can't wait to see what's coming up next, right? And so this is like sexuality and food and music and good relationships are the bacon wrapped little smokies that God puts in our life to be like, just wait till the main plate, wait till the main course. And that main course comes through connection with God in the life that is called eternal life that Jesus says. So, sexuality is the thing that awakens our lack, our need for God to truly fulfill us. So the last thing you guys need to do before we're out of here is, based off of Gigi's chapter summary and some of the things that I've said here, and maybe even your own inferences, I want you to answer, what's the role of sexuality in a sacred marriage? How can sexuality point a couple toward holiness? So once you do that exit ticket, we are all done for today. If you need any help or have any questions, you can drop in the Zoom room. Some of you still haven't given me your verse quiz, so make that happen. Make sure that you do the blindfold thing if you're just sending me a video, so that I can tell that you're not just reading it off of something. And that's it. Have a great day, everyone.